Good afternoon. Today we begin looking at chapter number 12, Leadership in Organizational Settings. Hopefully by the end of this chapter, you will be able to define leadership and shared leadership. You will be able to describe the four elements of transformational leadership and explain why they are important for organizational change. Compare managerial leadership with transformative leadership and describe the features of task-oriented, people-oriented, and servant leadership. Discuss the elements of path, goal theory, and leadership substitute theories. Describe the two components of the implicit leadership perspective. Identify 8 personal attributes associated with effective leaders and describe authentic leadership. And discuss cultural and gender similarities and differences in leadership. Ceridian Chairman and CEO David Ossip is noted as one of the highest rated leaders. And this has been attributed in part to the fact that he is a visionary. He's able to inspire others. He's an effective communicator. And he models for his followers the kind of behavior that he would expect from them. Let's take a look at defining this notion of leadership. The definition of leadership is the ability to influence, motivate, and enable others to contribute towards the effectiveness of the organization of which they are members. So think about that critically. We often think of leadership in other terms, but the ability to influence, to motivate, and to facilitate others towards a shared goal for an organization is a way of thinking about leadership. Leaders motivate others through persuasion and other influence tactics. So again, we're looking at this notion of being able to influence and motivate those who follow you. Leaders are also enablers. They configure the work environment to make it easier for employees to achieve organizational objectives. So if you look at two of those, one of those speaks to the individuals and the other speaks to the environment. Can you influence the individuals? Are you able to organize the environment or shape the environment such that it allows others to achieve their goals? Then there's this notion of shared leadership, which is the view that leadership is a role, not a position assigned to one person, such that people within the team and organization leads each other. Kind of a different way of thinking about leadership as being one person up top and all of these followers. Leadership is a role, not a position assigned to one person, but that it happens within the team and within the organization as we learn how to lead each other. For example, employees lead each other as the occasion rises. An example, an employee might become a champion for new ideas and for new technologies or new ways of thinking and new ways of getting the job done. This is also this notion of shared leadership. And shared leadership tends to flourish when formal leaders are willing to delegate powers. And believe it or not, the ability to delegate, knowing when to delegate and to whom to delegate are really skills that are critical within the workplace. Shared leadership flourishes when there is a collaborative, not a competitive culture. And that is where the employees support each other rather than vie against each other for position, clout, visibility, and etc. Shared leadership tends to flourish more when employees develop skills to influence each other. Again, there's a focus not on one person and those underneath him or her, but more the sense of a team, a collaborative environment where we develop the skills that are needed to influence each other. What about this notion of perspectives of leadership? Well, when we think about the perspectives of leadership, This chapter is organized around four main perspectives of leadership. There's the transformative, which views effective leaders as agents of change. Again, transformative leaders have the skills, the abilities, the personalities to affect change. There's the notion of managerial leadership perspective, helping employees improve performance and well-being towards current objectives and practices. There's the notion of implicit leadership, which is perceptual perspectives of leadership, those inward perceptions, perspectives, thoughts that we have about leadership and leadership qualities and individuals. Then there's leader attributes, the personal characteristics that support an individual's leadership potential. As you think about it, so what are my leadership attributes? What are the personal qualities that support my own sense of leadership and my own leadership potential? Let's look at this notion of transformative leadership. As we think about transformative leadership, there are four elements of transformative leadership. Transformative leaders develop and communicate a strategic vision. Transformative leaders are able to model their vision for their followers. Transformative leaders are not afraid of experimentation. They even encourage experimentation, thinking out of the box, new ways of seeing old problems. And they build a commitment. They're able to build among individuals, teams, employees, a commitment to the vision that they are able to cast within the organization. Keith Crack sort of is a serial transformative leader. He's a serial entrepreneur who co-founded or led several technology firms. For each firm, he developed and communicated an inspirational, strategic vision for the future of that group or that organization. A vision is an aspirational future for a higher purpose. I'd like to repeat that. The vision is an aspirational future for a higher purpose. The features of an effective vision are, number one, you're able to link to personal values, fulfills the needs of multiple stakeholders, and you're able to even motivate your employees. Now, it has challenging objectives, requires substantial change, for example, new work practices or beliefs. So again, the features of strategic visioning is to be challenging and have challenging objectives. Well, an abstract future state. That is, the future hasn't yet been experienced. So you can't detail what it looks like. It leaves room open for possibilities. It enables visions to remain stable over time, yet sufficiently flexible for external environmental changes. So again, you've got this notion of abstract future. The future is yet to be determined, and there's enough flexibility such that creativity happens and change within the organization is supported. There's a unifying idea. That is a sense of bonding employees together. There's a unifying idea, subordinate objectives. And the main thing becomes, how do we unify people? How do we bond them together as a team? Then aligning um, personal values with the organizational values. As we think about unifying idea, um, we support the organizational identification, and the individuals within the organization have values that correspond to or matches the organization. Now, there are elements of transformative leadership. As you think about the elements of transformative leadership, first and foremost, you develop a vision, and then you move forward to communicate that vision. And that is, a visionary leader will do those two things. And he communicates through the use of symbols and metaphors and stories. So, as you might think about it, a transformative leader is an effective communicator and has a wide range of communication tools that he, she, they uses at their disposal. You might borrow images from other experiences you've had to create meaning. So you're able to draw from your own life experiences, and you're able to draw from other sources. Have There's even an extent to which a visionary, a transformative leader, is able to engender and generate strong emotions among his or her followers or her peers, teammates. Yeah, you're able to generate strong emotions and commitments and feelings around your vision. Transformative leader is able to frame the vision, guide or construct the listeners into developing kind of a mental model of the situation. And, leaders, transformative leaders communicate with humility, sincerity, passion, and they show personal belief and optimism about a particular vision. The second part of that is the transformative leader not only develops and communicates the vision, but actually models, demonstrates the behavior, a commitment to the behavior among his or her followers. They walk the talk by leading by example. They interact with the vision. It's not something lofty or abstract. They personify it. They walk it. They talk it. They lead by example. And then a transformative leader symbolizes and demonstrates the vision through significant events and routine, through his or her daily activities. Again, my work and how I engage in this work lines up with this vision that I'm casting. The importance of modeling the vision is twofold. Number one, it legitimizes and demonstrates what the vision looks like in practice. Number two, words and actions that are consistent build trust among your followers, trust for the leader. When your vision casting is consistent and compatible with your vision walking, it engenders a sense of trust, a sense of legitimacy, a sense that this leader is authentic. And then transformative leadership has some other elements. Now, we've talked about number one, developing and communicating the vision. Number two, modeling the vision, but also it encourages experimentation. Um, in order for change to happen, there has to be some freedom to experiment. It's necessary. It's vital. So, a transformative leader encourages questioning of current practices. He encourages discovery and trying out new practices, learning orientation. As a transformative leader, he encourages that. And number four, he builds commitment to the vision, strengthening us through early elements. Through the notion of early elements, a transformative leader builds vision. What do I mean by that? Communicating the vision builds enthusiasm. Modeling the vision builds trust and understanding. Encouraging experimentation builds ownership through involvement, and higher commitment also through rewards, recognition, celebrations, and so forth. Charismatic. Yeah, transformative leaders are very charismatic. Some leadership models claim charisma is an essential part of transformative leadership. Well, evidence. Charismatic leadership is different from transformative leadership. So, how is it different? Well, charisma is a personal trait that provides referential power over followers. Okay, legitimate kinds of power, referential power, the ability to the sense that you have the ability to reward and so forth. Transformative leadership is a set of behaviors that engages your followers. Charismatic leadership motivates followers through the leader's referent power, produces dependent followers. Transformative leadership motivates followers through persuasion and trust. It empowers them. And particularly, it motivates them when they have a sense of trust in you and in the system, and they've been persuaded that the vision is healthy and worthy. Transformative leadership risks that leaders become intoxicated by their charisma, focuses them on self-interest more than common good. So yeah, there's a risk that you become intoxicated. You become drinking from the heady wine of your own sense of importance. Let's talk a moment then about evaluating this notion of transformative leadership. Transformative leaders make a difference. Higher employee satisfaction is what happens. You get a better sense of organizational commitment, higher and better performance, a sense of organizational citizenship, that people become better citizens. Better and more creative decision making happens in a transformative leadership situation. Transformative leadership, though, has some limitations. What about this notion of circular and logic? It shouldn't define and measure transformative leadership by its effects on employees. So think about that. We're not just measuring the effects on the employees. What about the notion of accomplishing the vision, the goals? Limitations, you got this mixed models of transformative leadership. By that, some models mix leadership behaviors with personal characteristics. Okay, some models tend to miss the leadership behavior with personal characteristics. So you got a problem, you got a cause, characteristics, and you got effects, which is a behavior. So you've got the cause, the characteristics, the effects, the behavior, sort of going on in the same concept model. So you've got these characteristics and behavior, and sometimes you're mixing those and even confusing the two. What about this universal theory and the limitations of that? Well, sometimes it's unclear whether transformative leadership is more beneficial in some situations than other. Is it really applicable universally? And are there times when transformative leadership might be limited, and sometimes when it might be beneficial? So you need to recognize the difference across cultures. For example, specific elements may be more appropriate in North America versus South. So again, there has to be some assessment and evaluation of when transformative leadership is effective. Let's move on to look at this notion of managerial leadership. How is it defined? It is a daily activity that supports and guides the performance and well-being of individual employees and the work unit to support current objectives and practices. Well, managerial leadership it can be assessed and noted as differences as compared to transformative leadership. Well, managerial leadership assumes stable goals and environment. Transformative leadership, however, assumes that the environment is dynamic and changing and flowing. I guess you can look at this doing things right versus doing the right thing. So managerial leadership looks at how do we do things right. Transformative say, well, let's do the right things. Well, managerial leadership is also micro focus versus transformative leadership, which is macro focus. It focuses on specific performance and well being, whereas transformative leadership focuses more on the unit, the collective shift to a new situation. Transformative and managerial leadership, however, we must stop and take a step back and realize that they are interdependent. dependent on each other to create effective workplace. Transformative needs managerial to translate the abstract vision into more specific operational behaviors and practices. So not only they're interdependent, they kind of need each other to help each other accomplish their individual goals. Managerial depends on transformative to set the right direction for an organization. Then there's the task versus people styles of leadership. Now, the earliest investigation of managerial leadership identified two distinct styles or clusters of behavior. There's a task-oriented behavior, which assign employees to specific tasks and help clarify the responsibilities around those tasks. Task-oriented behavior set goals and deadlines and provides feedback. It establishes work procedures and help plan out your work in a futuristic way. But now, people-oriented behaviors have a concern for the employee needs, make the workplace pleasant, recognizes employees' contribution, and listen to employees' opinions and their ideas. Now, both styles are necessary, but they have different effect. Task-oriented ends up you're having a higher job performance as a result of task-oriented leadership. People-oriented leadership, you have higher job satisfaction, higher satisfaction with your leaders, the environment, and as you would imagine, a lower turnover rate. And one of my favorite, because I see myself as a servant leader, is this notion of servant leadership, serving followers towards their need fulfillment, personal development, and growth leadership. Leaders serve followers rather than kind of vice versa. So serving followers towards the fulfillment of their needs. You got the characteristics of being selfless, egalitarian, humble, nurturing, empathetic, ethical coaches, if you will. Now, there are three main features or characteristics of servant leaders: a natural desire of calling to serve others. That is the notion of purpose, or even sense of a calling towards the task or the assignment, the duty. Humble, egalitarian, accepting relationships with followers. Leading is not about power or status. It's relationship oriented. Anchor decisions and actions in ethical principles and practices. There's the notion of path goal leadership, the contingency model of managerial leadership. Best leadership style depends on the employee's situation. So yeah, there's a contingency. The leadership style that's employed depends on the environment, the employee, the situation, what's needed. Leaders use various styles to influence employees' expectations. That is the path to achieve results. That is the goal. And satisfaction. That is the outcome variance. So yeah. Leaders use various styles to influence employees' expectations. That is the path to achieve the results, which are the goals, and the satisfaction, that is the outcome variance. They clarify the link between the employee behaviors and the outcomes. That's the P to O expectancies. They influence the variance of those outcomes, and they provide a work environment to facilitate goal accomplishments. There are 4 path goal leadership styles, if you will. There's the directive. The same as task-oriented leadership. You sort of clarify your performance goals, and it becomes a means to reach those goals and performance standards. They're supportive, sort of the same as people-oriented leadership. Friendly, approachable, makes works pleasant, shows respect and concern. There's a participative. The employee involved in the decisions. Leaders consult with employees, ask for suggestions, applies ideas. There's achievement oriented, wherein you encourage peak performance. You set challenging goals. You have this notion of continuous improvement. You show high confidence. You apply goal setting, and positive self-fulfilling prophecy is your way of looking at things. Now, the path goal leadership model is nothing more than the effectiveness of the four styles depend on the employee and the environment contingencies. Leadership effectiveness then is based upon the employee motivation and satisfaction, but also the acceptance of the leader. There's a path goal leadership contingency. Look at the skill and experiences. Well, low skills and experience, in that case, you're going to use the directive and more supportive leadership style. What about skilled and experienced employees? You will avoid the more directive leadership style and allow these individuals to work more independently. There's the notion of a locus of control. Well, when the locus of control is internal, you prefer participative and achievement oriented leadership. Yeah, when your locus of motive of control is driven internally, you prefer participative and achievement oriented leadership. When it's external, you're more satisfied with directive and supporting leadership. Or I would say when it's external, you kind of need more of a directive and supportive leadership style. When it's internal, you kind of need to utilize more participative and achievement oriented leadership style to work with those kind of employees. What about task structure? There's a routine versus non-routine. Well, you might think of non-routine sort of as a directive style to minimize ambiguity, participative style to allow more discretion is when you want to use the non-routine. What about the routine? To avoid directive style, you want to be a supportive leader. If work is tedious and has a lack of control. What about team dynamics? Well, you've got low cohesion, you've got dysfunctional norms, and you've got high cohesion. Well, when there's low cohesion, you must use a supportive style. When there's the functional norms, you have to use a directive style to kind of counteract that. Now, high cohesion with performance-oriented norms substitute for more leadership interventions, if you would think about that. And again, there's this evaluative piece to all of that. You really do have to evaluate and think about what is most important and what is needed. By evaluative, you receive more research support, and you have to kind of do the research and report and evaluate, what is needed and how am I going to motivate these individuals, and when is my style or my leadership style effective or not, and when do I need to adjust that? Yeah. What about leadership substitutes? Contingencies. Leadership substitutes can be defined as contingencies that limit a leader's influence or make a particular leadership style unnecessary. Let's talk about some examples. Um, Training and experience may be used to replace more a task-oriented leadership style. So yeah, you come with some more training and experience as a way of countering the need to lead in a task orientation kind of way. Cohesive teams might be a way of replacing supportive leadership. So that's less taxing on the leader when the leader is having to be so supportive. Well, think about stretching that support around and delegating it around, and think about ways of creating a cohesive team. And the team itself provides a lot of the needed support. Self-leadership replaces task-oriented and achievement-oriented leadership. So to the extent to which people are able to lead themselves and direct themselves. There's this notion of research evidence as well that a few substitutes replace the need for task or people-oriented leadership, but others do not. So some of those substitutes can replace the need for task or people-oriented leaders, but that's not all across the board. Leadership substitutes do not completely replace the leader. So please think about that, even as you think about this notion of more team cohesion as a way of countering the need for the leader to be overwhelmingly supportive. But still, even though you've got a cohesive team, it does not still totally eliminate the need for the leader, him, her, or their self, to be supportive as well in that situation. There's this implicit notion of implicit leadership perspective, which, leadership also involves followers' perspectives of the characteristics and attributions of people in formal leadership situations. So in other words, you have to think about your followers' perspective, and not just, everything is not just driven by the leader's perspective. Well, there's some prototypes for leadership. There's the prototype preconceived belief that characterize what we think of as an effective leader. Positive evaluations when leaders' feature and behaviors are similar to effective leadership prototypes. So we then evaluate that as being an effective leader when their behavior are similar to, the desired prototype or the prototype we have in mind. The reason leader effectiveness emerges over a long period of time. But people need to quickly trust someone as a quality of a leader. So again, we have these needs to be able to prototype and put people in boxes and make judgments. But as you think about it, an effective leader happens over time. But there's this notion in work environments to have a quick sense or way or meaning of trusting your people. There's also this notion of the romancing of leadership. The romance of leadership effect. Followers tend to distort perceptions of leadership influence. Reason number one, simpler explanation. It's easier to look at the leader's ability versus coming up with more complex kinds of interpretations of his or her fluence. So we romanticize it. Number two, there's a need for situational controls. Employees feel better believing that the leader makes a difference, so they look for this evidence whether it's there or not. So this romancing of leadership that somehow happens. What about personal attributes of effective leadership? What about the personal attributes of effective leadership? Well, as we think about that, specific skills and knowledge and aptitudes and other personal characteristics that contribute to a person's effectiveness or their potential as a leader. What are these personal attributes? Well, there's the whole notion of personality. Most of the big five personality dimensions or personality tests, no matter any of them that you've taken, or sort of based upon some of the same variables or the same factors. But some of the strongest variables or factors or personality trait that have been linked to effective leadership is the notion of high extroversion. You're comfortable having an influential role. And what about conscientiousness? Conscientiousness is another valuable quality that is associated with high levels of effective leadership. There's a notion of self. Your self concept is complex. That is that you have several different ways of evaluating yourself and thinking about yourself. There's some internal consistency with you that there's not this dissonance always going on. You have a clear sense and view of yourself as a leader. Makes for an effective leader. A positive self-evaluation, a good sense of self-esteem or self-efficacy, thinking that you can achieve and get to the desired points. And it's sort of an internal locus of control that you do not need external forces, but you are motivated internally. What about this notion of leadership motivation as one of the markers or characteristics of an effective leader? Well, you are motivated to lead others. Certainly, you're not going to be an effective leader if that's not a motivation of yours. And anyone who's been in the workplace already knows that leadership and leading and supervising others is one of the strongest and most challenging aspects of any job. You have a strong need for socialized power, believe it or not. And I guess I use power not in the more negative or abusive sense, but power as the ability to get stuff done. So a strong leader has a sense of socialized power and is not afraid of that. What about drive? A moderately high need for achievement, sort of more inner motivation, related to high consciousness, extroversion, self-evaluations. You have a sense to inspire, you're inquisitive, you're action oriented, and a measure of boldness is needed to be a leader. What about integrity? Truthful and consistency of your word and action, your walk and your talk are compatible. You are able to make decisions and judgments regarding dilemmas and contradictions using sound values. You are honest and have a sense of ethical conduct. To be an effective leader, you have to have some knowledge of the business. You have to understand the organization's environment in which you are functioning. Understand how the organization internally works effectively. And then there's the cognitive and practical intelligence that's also associated with effective leadership, or one of the variables or characteristics of effective leadership. Above average cognitive ability, process large volumes of information, super ability to analyze complex alternatives and opportunities. Then there's a practical intelligence, understand the relevance and application of ideas in the real world. Then you got this notion of emotional intelligence, able to recognize and relegate emotions in themselves and add it in other people. Well, for instance, you can tell when your conversations are having the intended emotional effect on your employees, or when you might need to back off or do something differently. There's a notion of authentic leadership. Effective leaders are aware of, feel comfortable with, and act consistently with their values, personality, and their self concept. They're congruent individuals. They know themselves. They are self aware and engage in self reflection often. They're able to receive feedback and trust the sources of the feedback. They understand their inner purpose and engage, emerge from a life story. They understand their own life story and how it impacts the way they see the world and understand themselves. They are themselves. They don't pretend to be someone else. Great leaders develop their own style. Self-discipline by applying and remaining anchored to your values, and they maintain a strong, positive self-evaluation. But now, as we've been talking about this whole leadership attributes perspectives, there are some limitations. We are assuming that there's kind of a universal list of traits. We assume that all effective leaders have the same personality characteristics and are equally important in all situations. Don't make that mistake. There are times when we think a leader has to fit into a mold, a box, or a characteristic, but might be surprised that someone who does not fit into that is actually an effective leader. Leadership can be too complex as you think about it for a universal list. So even the way we talk about these attributes and these perspectives is limiting, but we have to have a vocabulary to talk about them. So you have different combinations of attributes that may be equally good as you think about leadership. So I might have some of this or some of that, and I have these different combinations of attributes. I might have some of one type and some of another type, and may even have kind of a blended model and end up being effective. Another limitation, we kind of view leadership as within the person, but leadership is relational. People are effective leaders because of their favorable relationships with their followers. And again, as we talk about leadership, you have to talk about followership and the individual's ability to engender or to create and inspire followership. One of the other limitations, the link between attributes and effective leadership is muddied by this notion of implicit leadership, that people who exhibit some attributes such as self-confidence, are called leaders because they fit the prototype of an effective leader. Followers assign non-observable traits to successful leaders as well. And then there's attributes indicate only leadership potential, not leadership performance. So a lot of the language that we're using and the definitions, they kind of speak to leadership potential, but you could have all of the potentials by virtue of how it looks and what we think and how we define it, but still not be able to create the necessary and the needing or the accompanying performance. Then there are cultural issues in leadership. You have to think about societal cultures and values and how those shape and change and how they differ according to different individuals. So societal cultural values shape the leader's norms and values. It also shapes the expectations of a follower. So if a follower has a sense of the societal norms and culture of his or her leader, then that's going to even shape some of your expectations about that particular leader. It influences decisions and actions. That is your cultural norms and values, perspectives. An executive who acts inconsistently with cultural expectations is more likely to be perceived as ineffective. Cultural norms and values and perspectives also shape the follower prototype of effective leaders. Some leadership styles are universal, others are across culture. For instance, charismatic visionary leadership is one of those things that's universally recognized. Participant style leadership is perceived or characterized as effective leaders in low power, distant cultures, but less so in high power, distance cultures. Then there are gender issues that also show up in leadership. Male and women and men have tendencies to have different kinds of leadership style and respond to different kinds of leadership style. They have similar tasks and people oriented leadership. Explanation is that real world jobs require similar behaviors from male and female job incumbent. Women, however, tend to adopt a participant leadership style more readily than their male followers. So there's this notion too of how do we then evaluate female leaders? Women are evaluated negatively when they try to apply full range of leadership style, directive or autocratic, whereas a male might just be called a good leader. Follow gender stereotypes and leader protocols, prototypes sometimes also distort how we evaluate women. Women are rated more favorably than men on emerging leadership qualities of coaching and teamwork, but again, more negatively when we talk about directing or being autocratic and so forth and so on.